Now, the EFF leader, Julius Malema, claims to have submitted evidence substantiating his allegations of corruption, fraud, racketeering and money laundering against Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan to the Brooklyn police station in Pretoria. Earlier, Gordhan was at the same police station, in fact, yesterday, pressing charges against Malema. Those include crimen, injuria, defamation of character, as well as the incitement of violence.
This commission, our trust is getting tested gradually. This man who's asking Pravin Gordhan questions provided on pro bono basis assistance to Adrian Lakay. Adrian Lakay is a spokesperson of Pravin Gordhan. So pro bono fighters means a lawyer helps you for free of charge. This guy who's asking Pravin questions yesterday and today gave legal services to the spokesperson of Pravin for free. This is the same person who comes from the commission to ask leading questions. That's why even when Pravin doesn't answer questions, the bastard doesn't interrupt. The bastard doesn't tell Pravin to answer. Instead, they allow Pravin to lecture them.
Our attack on Pravin Gordhan is an attack on white monopoly capital, because Pravin is a dog of white monopoly capital.
Any harassment of witnesses appearing before the Commission will deter other potential witnesses who otherwise may have wanted to come forward and give evidence and assist this Commission.
On those two clips, that was the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, speaking outside the Zondo Commission last week. And you saw in that last one the response of the Deputy Chief Justice saying that it would be unacceptable for any witnesses who appear before his commission to be intimidated. What does this all mean? We're joined now by the National Spokesperson of the Red Berets, Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlosi. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for talking to us this evening. We played you those two clips to lay the context.
Let me also thank you and greet the viewers. Thank you very much.
We played you those two clips to lay the context, obviously, what was said last week and what was said by Julius Malema today. There is a sense that he was saying today that what he intended last week was not to intimidate any witnesses. He certainly says he respects the work of the Commission. Contrasting that with what we've just played.
Well, I think that we mustn't restrict robust political discourse in the country and reduce it to intimidation, harassment. That is precisely what brought the commission in the first place. The EFF stood outside the union buildings and hundreds of thousands of its members to demand the release of Thuli Madonsela's report, and the same type of political robust talk in protest and also in litigation led to the release of that report, which made this commission possible. That's how we hold each other accountable. Pravin Gordhan is no ordinary witness. He is a minister in the cabinet. He is also one of the persons who served as the finance minister majority of Zuma's term of office. So it means that he would have been there, silent, when majority of the corruption that we are speaking about in relation to the Guptas happened, until Zuma fired him. And then he started speaking, which means his conscience is opportunistic in relation to his selfish interests about his career prospects. And secondly, the issues we are speaking to are beyond the commission. The terms of reference in relation to this commission are dealing with state capture in relation to the Gupta family. But what we're talking about and the charges that we're laying today relate to the things beyond the terms of reference of the commission. The final one is the criticism about the commission taking place at Tiso Black Star. I mean, look at yesterday. Jimmy Manyi led evidence in relation to a newspaper that was used by the Guptas to loot state resources. if you are making that evidence at the headquarters of a rival newspaper, that's not neutral grounds. It's not good for justice, because justice must not just be done, it must also be seen to be done.
Absolutely. Look, let's break some of the issues you've raised here. Pravin Gordhan, of course, would argue that he did precisely the opposite, that he was fired precisely because he was fighting from within the system. But specifically, the clips we played there, the references to him being a dog of white monopoly capital, the references to the evidence leader in the Zondo Commission being referred to by Julius Malema as a bastard, that's exactly the kind of thing that Justice Zondo was responding to this morning, because you may not think it's intimidation, but he certainly seems to think so.
To intimidate you, I must invite harm on your person or your body or your property.
Beat the dog until its owner comes out?
Yeah,
surely
but those are figures of speech in a broader political discourse that is robust. The characteristic feature of white monopoly capital is greed. In our everyday vernacular, you're greedy, you're a dog, because it means you don't think for other people. So the idiom of a dog relates to the central feature of white monopoly capital. If you are serving the interest of white monopoly capital, you are serving the interest of greedy people who are willing to be rich at the expense of the entire population that is not only unemployed but lives in huge ways under the poverty line. So this is political discourse, and it's politician to politician. And in relation to the person that was the evidence leader, we're pointing to a simple, conflict of interest sort of legal point here about people who are giving each other pro bono services and now interrogating each other in a commission without even declaring those things. And I mean, we didn't see Pravin being pushed the way other witnesses are being pushed, so we are making commentary in relation to that.
Look,
and that's not intimidation.
It may be in your framing of it. It may be in your framing of it political discourse, but we know, of course, words do matter. For example, one of the things that emerged from last week was the naming of particular journalists who have now come forward to say they have experienced real intimidation as a result of the utterances that were made last week. So you may frame it as political discourse, you may frame it as rhetorics, but words do matter. We know people have taken up action in support of what they think their leaders are calling them to do.
No single member of the EFF, in the name of the EFF, is going to beat up anyone, let alone journalists. So the EFF was very clear through the Commander-in-Chief, even on the day, that when we're saying these things, in fact, on that day, he didn't stop at political rhetoric. He explained what the political rhetoric and the words that he uses actually mean. And he, in categorical terms, said, I mean an intellectual shutdown of these people. But now I want us to think deeply about whether these people are journalists or not, in two ways. One, majority of them are no longer doing stories. They're no longer on the ground doing balanced stories. They are standing columnists who write opinion pieces. They've got special columns on the Sunday Times. And they write opinions, not stories. They campaign.
But surely they can do both.
They are not I'm saying they've not done that. They've not been journalists forever. They were journalists.
Let's take Ranjani Mbuyiseni, for example. She spends every day at the Zondo Commission. She writes about what has happened. She obviously also writes columns, but she also writes factual pieces of what she's covering.
Majority of what goes, and that's why those things are in the opinion pieces. They are not in the news. Because even if she's organizing facts, she's organizing them and marshalling them for an opinion, for an argument, to persuade society to think in a specific way. That's what I do in my everyday life. I organize facts to persuade society to think in a specific way. And then who comes in their defense? The South African National Editors Forum. Those are the bosses. Those are the editors. Those are not the ground journalists.
You have refused to meet with them. I mean, surely...
No. I want to finish this point before the question of meeting them. They are the bosses. They are the people when a journalist comes and says, here is my story. They decide which part of the paper it will go, what frame it will take. They even decide the headline of both the paper and what goes to the street. So there's a whole lot of people that we spend everyday time with. Those journalists, for instance, that were there in Pretoria, those are the ground forces of journalism in this country. Nobody speaks for them. We've not refused to meet SANEF. We've met them before. We don't have time now. We'll meet them after elections.
So between now and then, the temperature stays high. There's no point of discussion.
We're too busy. We've got a lot on our plate. will meet the bosses of journalists after elections.
Let me go back to the Zondo Commission.
Yes,
you
sir.
yourself have been quoted as saying that the commission runs the risk of being a Mickey Mouse commission. Julius Malema has accused it by being held at Diso Blackstaff stealing money from the poor. Don't those kinds of comments run the risk of delegitimizing the commission?
It is the commission that is inviting those types of comments. It's not us who invented. We didn't send them to Diso Blackstar. I find it surprising that that we're not finding each other on this point as a country. When they're public buildings that you could go to, why pay money
Justice
to go
Zondo today said they looked around. I mean, you may disagree.
No, we wrote to him.
Here's the thing.
He wrote back to us and said he doesn't deal specifically with those things the secretary is going to. Now, our leadership is looking on ways of meeting the secretary of the commission to speak about not only the monies that are being paid being there, a Diso Blackstar, bro.
Look, you may disagree with his choice of venue, and you certainly have the right to ask those questions. What I'm asking you, though, is by framing it as stealing money from the poor, does it then not delegitimize what may emerge from this process if you framed it in that way?
No, he just has to move to a public venue. That's how you get away. We're going to hold anybody accountable. We're going to hold the Chief Justice accountable. We're going to hold the President accountable. Nobody is above the scrutiny of the law. It's latter and spirit.
Right. Today you've laid charges against Pravin Gordhan, the Public Enterprises Minister, presumably in that spirit. The question I would have for you is, why have you waited until now? Because it does appear on the face of it, this is a tit-for-tat laying of charges. He laid charges against you yesterday, you're going after him today. If you've had this information, firstly, just as parliamentarians, why haven't you used the mechanisms available to you to look at those issues through Parliament, for example, and why have you waited until now?
We have. We wrote 34, if I'm not mistaken, questions through the parliamentary process to Pravin. He had 10 days to answer. That 10 days passed, he didn't answer. The questions of the bank account, the questions of the tenders in relation to Anisha, we wrote to him through the parliamentary process, he didn't answer. He has shown disdain, by the way, to that institution by not sticking to its rules. He didn't answer. But also the people that are giving us this information, and I suspect he may have intercepted, so the first move is not of him. It's us who put those questions to him over 2 weeks ago already. In that now, we got the bank account, because the people are coming out. They are being encouraged. They are being given confidence. They see that we are willing, to fight on this question, so they feel safer. They're coming out. Some of them are willing to submit affidavits. So it's them who are coming out now with the tangible evidence. That's number two. But isn't it shocking? Shouldn't the same question sort of go to him? Have you seen Pravin Gordhan in a police station to lay charges against the Guptas, against the corruption that he says he witnessed? And he runs to lay charges against the opposition political party that is asking him questions.
Yeah, he says
it's
this
defamation.
Is an abuse of the process.
No, defamation, by the way, I don't know anyone who lays charges of defamation at a police station. It's a civil claim, a civil suit. But when we say to you, we ask you questions through the parliamentary process, we're not defaming you. We're asking you about people's money. We're asking you about your role as a commissioner. We're asking you about your role in relation to being a finance minister. That's not defaming, that's holding you accountable. And we are telling you now, we've got evidence. We've got people who are willing to go on the record. Today we gave you a bank account. We've been asking about this account for over 3 weeks. And Pravin has not said anything. And the rest of the media is also not asking him about this offshore account. So
we'll have to leave
it's not
there.
Defamation. We're holding him accountable. All we are asking, play the ball, corruption. That's what we are trying to uncover here. And please be consistent.
All right, we'll have to leave it there with
Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Mbuyiseni Ndlosi, the national spokesperson of the EFF.